A plant that I think most of us hated before 2014 would have been kale. It seems like the whole world decided that they now love kale over the last 5 years or so. I'm in that camp. I used to hate it, now I like it. I certainly like to grow it, and that's why in today's video we're talking about 9 different types of kale that you should try growing this fall. Kevin Espiritu here from Epic Gardening, where it's my goal to help you grow a greener thumb, and some of that is mixing in different varieties of a basic plant. Kale, I would say, is a somewhat basic fall crop, spring crop that can spice it up. Whether you either want some visual appeal, you want something to grow better for your specific condition, or you just want it to taste a little bit different, then I've got some great varieties for you, most of which I've already planted, but they're still germinating, so I don't have them to show you right now. So what we'll do is we'll throw some up here. But without further ado, cultivate that like button, and I will even toss in a little kale chip recipe at the end of this video, and let's get into it. The first kale we will talk about is a curly kale variety called Winterbor. It's going to be your standard, I would say, garden variety, but in this case I'll say grocery variety kale, the one you'll see at the grocery store most often. Standard green, really curly, really textured, and a classic flavor. Next up, you have Redbor, which is still a curly kale variety, but as the name would imply, it's got a lot more red in it. I believe it has more anthocyanin content, a little more antioxidant content perhaps, but regardless, I find that that one is extremely cold tolerant. I was on a seed tour where it was quite cold out, took a nice crunchy taste of it, and it was absolutely amazing. Nice sweetness to it. Kale in general, as the temps go colder, the sweetness of the plant does go up. So if you are in an area that frosts, a really good tip is to push it into the fall, maybe even a little bit of the winter, depending where you live, and get a little frost on it. It's frost tolerant, or you can throw a frost blanket up and then harvest it, because that flavor is actually going to be quite a bit better. Here I have to do a lot different with my kale. I can't quite push it there because we don't even get temps that cold, so I have to grow some different varieties, which I will talk about in a second. So last in our curly varieties I've got for you is a curled blue Scotch kale. It goes by a couple different names, but that's the basic gist of it. And what you're looking at there is it's kind of like a Winterbor or a standard green curly kale, except for it has this bluish, almost undertone or metallic-esque tinge to it. It's nice and sweet. It makes a really good kale chip recipe. So if you want to mix up the curly kale with a little bit of spice, a little bit of intrigue, then go with the dwarf curled blue Scotch kale. But again, bunch of different names on that, but that's what I would recommend. So our next macro category of kale would be the flat-leaved varieties. A lot of you think of dinosaur kale, Lacinato Kale, which we'll talk about, but the first one I have for you is red Russian Kale. This is actually one that I grew a lot as a microgreen when I was growing and selling microgreens to high-end restaurants here in San Diego. Chefs love it, but if you let it grow up, and microgreens are just miniature versions of the same exact plant, if you let it grow up, the flavor is really nice. The name implies it has a little bit of that reddish tinge to it, specifically in the stems. Flat-leaved kales are great for chopping. You can mix them into a salad. They don't fluff it up with a lot of volume, and so that's one way that you can use these. So the next one up is Lacinato Kale, also known as dinosaur kale. I believe, in my mind, that the reason it's called that is the sort of bumpy-esque texture, almost like reptile skin, like an iguana or a Komodo dragon or dinosaur. And so it's a really unique look. The leaves are a little more gray-green blue. They are very good for eating fresh, especially if you harvest it in that cold, you get that sweetness, that nuttiness. You can strip the stem really easily by just pulling with your finger. Don't need to use any special tools. So Lacinato Kale, there's a reason why it's so popular at the grocery store and the farmer's market, because it's tasty with a lot of good use cases. So next up is one that I really like. It's called red Ursa Kale. The leaves are, I suppose, some sort of hybrid between a flat and curly. They sprawl out more. They have more sort of a webbed look to them. And then the stems are this beautiful, beautiful red color with this dark, foresty, vibrant green on the leaves. So it's a really nice one. I mean, for me, it's one of my favorites that I've ever grown, except for this next one. The next one is Dazzling Blue Kale. The leaves, it's a flat leaf variety, but they are more like the leaves of a tree, like a deciduous tree, sort of this type of shape. They're a little smaller, but again, that stem is nice and bluish. And even the leaf itself, kale has this interesting quality where the greens tend to have these under/overtones of like a gray or a metallic or a blue. So Dazzling Blue Kale is a fantastic gourmet cultivar, so to speak. I think it's a really cool one if you want to feature the kale in a dish and actually use it as the mainstay of what you're cooking. So a unique variety of kale is Siberian kale. It's not Brassica oleracea, which is the kale that we know and love, but it's Brassica napus. So it is a different species, but for all intents and purposes, it is called a kale. It grows more similar to like a turnip or a radish, something like that. The reason why is because it has these leaves. They lay a little flatter. They are a little bit more mild. You can treat them more as you would treat, like, let's say a mustard green or a turnip green. So it's a good kale to mix in if you want a little bit more variety. One that you will see labeled as Chinese broccoli can be considered a kale of sorts, mostly because when you're eating Chinese broccoli, you're not eating the flowering head or the immature flowering head, you're eating the leaves themselves. And so you could consider this sort of a Chinese kale. It's a brassica. Many of these plants stem from the same species. They're actually cultivars of the same species: broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, etc. Same species, different part of the plant was emphasized for the breeding, which is kind of a mind-blowing fact about the world of gardening, the world of plants, and even these vegetables. We think we're eating these really unique wild vegetables, but in fact it's the same species that's been branched out like 5 or 6 times. But Chinese cabbage, or Chinese broccoli specifically, is a great one if you want a little bit more of that Asian flavor in your dish. Last but not least, I do not want to leave you warmer season gardeners out in the lurch. For me, kale has been a struggle to grow anywhere close to the summer, because really here in Southern California, you have your warm season, you have your shoulder season, cool season, shoulder season, and then it repeats. You don't have a true winter and a true, the seasons are just all a little bit wonky. So for me, I grow Black Magic Kale from my friend Brigitte over at San Diego Seed Company. This is one that seems to perform even into the summer. It'll still work without degrading the flavor, because as I said, kale likes to get sweeter when it's colder, and it gets a little more bitter and sort of astringent in the heat. If you're harvesting it in the heat, it doesn't seem to be the case with Black Magic Kale. So I really recommend that one if you are a warmer season gardener who typically struggles with these colder weather loving crops. But guys, some variety in the world of kale. Who knew? Pick one, grow it this fall, or put it on your list for next spring. And until next time, good luck in the garden and keep on growing.